My brother and wife cheated behind my back, destroyed our family when I found out. I moved and started over, but I never thought I'd be sharing my story with strangers on the internet, but here I am. I'm Jack, 38 years old, and I thought I had a happy marriage with my wife, Jessica. We've been together for 14 years and married for 10. We met in college, where she was the social butterfly and I was the quieter, focused type. It felt like a classic case of opposites attract. We built a good life together, careers, a house in the suburbs, and even a dog. Named Max. Things were going well until about a year ago when I started noticing small changes in Jessica's behavior. It was subtle at first. She started coming home late, claiming work was demanding more of her time. She became more guarded with her phone, always tilting the screen away from me. If I asked who she was talking to, she'd brush it off, saying, "Just some friends from the office." I didn't want to pry, so I let it go. But deep down, I felt something was off. Then, out of nowhere, my brother, Ryan, moved back to town. He'd been traveling for work, and we hadn't seen each other much over the past few years. When he came back, I was thrilled to have my best friend around again. He's always been the life of the party, the guy everyone loves to hang out with. Jessica was just as excited, saying it would be great to have more family time. Looking back, I realized I was naive, blind even. Ryan and Jessica started spending more time together, going out to run errands, and even planning surprise dinners for me. I thought it was sweet at first. But then, I'd come home to find them laughing together, sharing jokes I didn't understand. It felt like I was the third wheel in my own house. I'm not sure what triggered it, but one night, I woke up in a cold sweat, convinced something was wrong. I got up and checked the house. Everything seemed normal until I glanced at Jessica's phone, which she'd left on the kitchen counter. A message notification from Ryan popped up. "I can't wait to see you tomorrow. Love you." I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. Love you? Why would my brother say that to my wife? I told myself it was just a misunderstanding. Maybe it was a joke or an inside reference I didn't get. But the sinking feeling in my stomach told me otherwise. I went back to bed that night, pretending I hadn't seen anything, but my mind was racing. I needed to know what was going on between them. I needed answers. After that night, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was happening behind my back. Jessica acted as if nothing had changed, but I started paying closer attention. I noticed she would sometimes get dressed up even if she was just running errands with Ryan. She'd put on makeup, wear perfume, things she didn't usually bother with unless we were going out somewhere nice. I tried convincing myself it was just my imagination. But then I started finding little things around the house that didn't add up. An extra wine glass in the sink when I knew I hadn't had any. A subtle hint of cologne that wasn't mine lingering on our couch. I pushed down my suspicions, telling myself not to jump to conclusions. After all, Ryan was my brother. He would never do something like this, right? But I couldn't ignore it any longer when I came home one day and found Jessica's phone left on the table again. This time it was unlocked. My heart was pounding in my chest as I scrolled through her messages with Ryan. My hands shook as I read the words. "Last night was amazing. I wish we could be together more often. I know, Jess, but we have to be careful. Jack can't find out." I felt sick. My brother and my wife were having an affair right under my nose. How long had this been going on? Why would they do this to me? 1,000 questions swirled through my mind, but I knew one thing for sure. I needed to confront them, but I had to be smart about it. If I just stormed in without proof, Jessica would find a way to twist it around, and Ryan would probably deny everything. I decided to collect evidence. I started by taking screenshots of their texts and sending them to myself. Then I went a step further. I set up a small recording device in the living room and bedroom. I needed to know exactly what was going on, and I couldn't rely on just my word against theirs. That night, I acted as if everything was normal. I even suggested that we invite Ryan over for dinner. Jessica seemed surprised, but happy. She made her favorite pasta dish, and we all sat down to eat like one big, happy family. I played along, forcing a smile, even though my stomach was churning the entire time. As the night went on, I watched the two of them closely. There were little glances, slight touches, things I wouldn't have noticed if I hadn't been looking for them. At one point, when I got up to get more drinks, I saw Jessica's hand briefly rest on Ryan's thigh under the table. That's when I knew for sure. They were good at hiding it, but not good enough. My mind was made up. The next morning, I took a day off from work and hired a private investigator. I wanted concrete proof, pictures, videos, anything that could capture the betrayal in a way that couldn't be denied or explained away. It took less than a week. The PI caught them meeting up at a hotel on the other side of town. The pictures made my blood boil. Jessica leaning in to kiss Ryan as they stood outside the room, her hand in his hair as they embraced. They looked so comfortable together, like a real couple. I never thought I'd have to see my wife look at someone else that way, let alone my own brother. But I wasn't ready to confront them yet. I needed more time to process it all, to figure out what I was going to say. I decided to act like everything was fine for a few more days while I planned my next move. Little did I know that things were about to get even more complicated. I thought I had everything figured out, but then my parents showed up unexpectedly one Saturday morning. They hadn't visited in years, but now they were suddenly at our doorstep, saying they missed us. Jessica seemed thrilled to see them, even more so than usual. She acted like the perfect daughter-in-law, smiling and laughing with them. It was odd, but I brushed it off. That night, my mom pulled me aside. "Jack, we're really worried about Ryan. This divorce has been hard on him." "Divorce?" I asked, stunned. I had no idea Ryan had even been married. She nodded. "Yeah, it happened a year ago. He's been struggling, and we hoped being closer to family would help." My mind was racing. Why hadn't Ryan told me? Why hadn't Jessica told me? Had their affair started as emotional support for his divorce? It felt like the ground was shifting beneath me. Had they been lying to me for even longer than I thought? The next day, I contacted the private investigator again and asked him to dig deeper into Ryan's past. Within a few hours, he called back with a shocking revelation. Ryan's divorce was due to infidelity, his infidelity with a married woman. That's when it hit me like a freight train. Jessica wasn't just a recent affair. She might have been the reason Ryan's marriage fell apart. I was left staring at the ceiling that night, wondering, had I lost my wife to my brother years ago? After learning about Ryan's divorce, I felt like my world was unraveling faster than I could hold it together. I needed answers, but I couldn't confront Jessica or Ryan just yet. If I was right, if Jessica had been involved with him since back then I needed to be absolutely certain. That evening, I sat Jessica down under the pretense of wanting to talk about our relationship. "Do you remember when Ryan moved back?" I asked casually. "Of course," she said, glancing at me with what seemed like genuine curiosity. "Why do you ask?" I just realized I never asked what brought him back. He never mentioned anything specific. Her expression tightened for a split second, but then she shrugged. "He just wanted a change. You know Ryan. He's never settled anywhere for long." "Right," I said slowly, watching her closely. "I also heard he'd been married before. Why didn't you tell me?" Jessica's face paled. "Oh, I didn't think it was important. He wasn't happy and it ended badly. I didn't want to bring it up." Her response was too quick, too rehearsed. There was something she wasn't telling me, but I let it slide. For now, I couldn't give away that I knew more. I needed her to believe I was still in the dark. That night, I dug through old photos and texts, trying to see if I'd missed any clues. It was hard to look back on pictures of family gatherings, knowing what I did now. But one particular photo stood out. A Christmas party from 3 years ago. Ryan's ex-wife, Linda, was in the shot, standing right next to Jessica. They looked close, like they'd known each other well. My heart pounded as I realized the truth. Jessica hadn't just hidden Ryan's marriage from me. She'd been friends with his wife while having an affair with him. This wasn't just betrayal. It was a twisted web of deceit that went back far longer than I'd ever imagined. Armed with this new information, I felt a surge of determination. I couldn't just sit there and pretend everything was fine anymore. I needed to dig deeper, and I knew exactly where to start. Jessica's old photos and messages. The next day, while Jessica was out, I went through her closet. Hidden in a shoebox at the back, I found several photo albums. As I flipped through them, I noticed something odd. There were multiple pictures of Ryan and Jessica together, laughing, hugging, sharing drinks. Photos I had never seen before. And in several of them, Ryan's ex-wife, Linda, was right there, smiling. The more I looked, the clearer it became. These weren't just friendly get-togethers. In one of the pictures, taken at what seemed like a beach house, Jessica was wearing a swimsuit I'd never seen. She and Ryan stood close, too close. He had his arm around her waist in a way that seemed almost possessive. And Linda? She was off to the side, looking away. I felt a knot tighten in my chest. Had they flaunted their relationship in front of Linda, too? It was sickening to think about. I took a few of the photos and put them in my pocket for safekeeping. Then I decided to check her old emails on our shared laptop. Scrolling back through the years, I found messages between her and Ryan that were mostly innocent, until I hit a series of drafts from about 3 years ago. They weren't addressed to anyone, but they read like letters to a lover. Jessica described feeling torn, wanting to be with him, but not wanting to hurt me. She wrote about how their connection felt undeniable and how she feared it would ruin everything. I couldn't believe it. Jessica had been struggling with her feelings for Ryan long before I ever suspected anything. But the worst part was that she'd clearly chosen him over me, even if she hadn't physically left me yet. Reading those words felt like a final betrayal. Jessica had been emotionally gone for years, and I'd been too blind to see it. I closed the laptop, my hands shaking. There was no more room for doubt. This affair wasn't just a fleeting mistake. It was a deliberate choice she'd made again and again. I needed to confront her. But how could I, knowing that the brother I once trusted had likely been part of this for years, knowing that, in some twisted way, they'd built a life together behind my back while keeping me in the dark? But I couldn't wait any longer. That night, I set my plan into motion. I would confront them both and get the truth out in the open, no matter what it cost. The silence between us stretched on, heavy and suffocating. I stared at Jessica, waiting for her to say something, anything that might change what I was feeling. But she just looked down, biting her lip, unable to meet my gaze. "Yes," she finally whispered, so softly I almost didn't hear it. My chest tightened. "Yes, what?" "Yes. I have feelings for him," she admitted, her voice trembling. I felt like the air had been knocked out of me, even though I'd suspected it. Hearing her say it aloud was different. It made everything real. I turned to Ryan, who was still avoiding my eyes. "And you? Did you ever care about our relationship? Our family?" "Of course I care, Jack," he muttered, barely looking up. "But things got complicated." "Complicated?" I scoffed. "You destroyed everything we had over some complicated feelings." Jessica started crying, but I couldn't find it in me to comfort her. "I didn't mean to hurt you, Jack. I tried to stop, I really did." "Stop pretending," I shouted. "You didn't try hard enough, Jessica. If you wanted to stop, you would have. But you didn't. You chose this." Ryan finally spoke up, his voice strained. "Jack, I know I messed up. I'm sorry, okay? But there is no but, Ryan. You're my brother, and you betrayed me." I stood up, looking at them both. Two people I thought I knew, now strangers. I don't know what happens next, I said slowly, but I do know that I can't stay here. Not with either of you. And with that, I walked out, slamming the door behind me, leaving them both in stunned silence. I drove aimlessly for hours that night, trying to process everything. My wife and my own brother. How could I even begin to move forward? Eventually, I pulled into a cheap motel parking lot and sat there, staring blankly at the dashboard. When I finally checked in, I felt completely numb. The room was small and bare, but it didn't matter. I collapsed onto the bed, trying to shut out the whirlwind of emotions, anger, betrayal, sadness, confusion that threatened to swallow me whole. The next morning, I called in sick to work. I couldn't face anyone, couldn't pretend that life was normal. Instead, I texted a few close friends, explaining that I needed some space. One of them, Mark, responded almost immediately. Come over if you need to talk, man. Whatever you need. I hadn't planned on telling anyone yet, but I couldn't handle being alone either. So I found myself driving to Mark's place, feeling a strange mixture of relief and dread. Mark opened the door and pulled me into a tight hug. Jack, what the hell happened? I sat down and spilled everything. The affair, the years of lies, the truth about Ryan's divorce. Mark listened quietly, his expression shifting from shock to anger. Those bastards, he muttered when I finished. What are you going to do? I shook my head, feeling lost. I don't know. I can't go back to that house. Not yet. Stay here as long as you need, Mark offered. We'll figure this out. For the first time in what felt like forever, I felt a flicker of hope. I had lost so much, but maybe I could rebuild, piece by piece. Staying at Mark's place gave me a chance to breathe, but the weight of everything still hung over me. After a few days, I knew I had to deal with the fallout. I couldn't just hide forever. I finally texted Jessica, I need to come by and get my things. I'll be there in an hour. She responded almost immediately. Okay, I'm so sorry, Jack. I ignored her apology and drove to the house. Pulling up to the driveway felt surreal, like stepping back into a place that no longer felt like home. When I walked inside, I found Jessica waiting in the living room, eyes red and puffy from crying. I packed up some of your clothes, she murmured, gesturing to a few boxes by the door. Thanks, I said stiffly. I didn't want to stay long, but I couldn't leave without saying something. Why didn't you just tell me, Jess? If you wanted him, why keep stringing me along? She looked down, wringing her hands. I didn't want to lose you. I didn't want to lose us. Us. I laughed bitterly. There hasn't been an us for a long time, has there? She started to cry again, but I felt no sympathy. I'm filing for divorce, Jessica. I don't want to drag this out. I understand, she whispered. But, Jack, I never meant for this to happen. I never wanted to hurt you. It's too late for that, I replied softly. I just want to move on. I grabbed my things and left without looking back. As I walked away, I realized that letting go of this place and everything it once represented was the first step in finally starting over. Leaving the house that day felt like shedding an old, suffocating skin. I drove back to Mark's place, feeling strangely lighter, as if confronting Jessica had lifted a small part of the weight off my chest. But there was still one loose end, Ryan. I hadn't spoken to him since the night I confronted them. I didn't want to, but I knew I couldn't avoid him forever. As much as I hated it, we were still family, and I had to figure out what came next for us if there was anything left at all. I texted him, meet me at the diner on 8th tomorrow morning. The response came quickly. I'll be there. The next morning, I walked into the small diner where Ryan and I used to grab breakfast as kids. He was already there, looking nervous and out of place. I sat down across from him, and for a long moment, neither of us spoke. Jack, Don't. I cut him off sharply. I don't want to hear sorry again. I just want answers. How long, Ryan? Ryan shifted uncomfortably, then sighed. It started right after my divorce. I was a mess, and Jess, she was just trying to help. Help, I scoffed. That's what you call it. He winced. It wasn't supposed to turn into this. I didn't plan it. Neither of us did. And what? You just fell into bed together by accident. I snapped. Spare me the details, Ryan. What I need to know is whether this is real for you. Are you two planning to be together? He hesitated, and that brief pause told me everything. We don't know yet, he admitted. We're figuring it out. I let out a bitter laugh. You destroyed our family for something you're not even sure of. Ryan looked down at his hands. I know I can't ask for your forgiveness, but I don't want to lose you too, Jack. You're my brother. I stared at him, feeling a strange mix of anger and pity. You already lost me, Ryan. You made that choice when you betrayed me. With that, I stood up and walked out of the diner. I didn't know if I'd ever be able to face him again. But one thing was certain. I was done letting their choices control my life. It was time to start living for myself. After my meeting with Ryan, I realized that cutting ties was the only way I could truly begin to heal. I blocked both his and Jessica's numbers, deleted them from my social media, and asked mutual friends to give me some space. I needed to rebuild my life, one piece at a time, without the constant reminders of what I'd lost. With nowhere else to go, I threw myself into work. The long hours kept me distracted, and for the first time in weeks, I felt like I was regaining some sense of control. But the silence of my nights at Mark's place still haunted me. I'd lie awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering how I could have been so blind. How could everything have gone so wrong? One night, Mark suggested something that completely caught me off guard. Why don't you take some time off, Jack? Go somewhere new. Get away from everything. Like a vacation? I asked, surprised. Yeah, but not just a break. A fresh start. There's no reason to stay tied down here, man. You've got the skills, the experience, you could get a job anywhere. His words stuck with me. I'd always thought of this town as home. But what was left here for me now? Jessica, and I had no kids, no lasting ties that couldn't be cut. Maybe a change of scenery was exactly what I needed. That weekend, I updated my resume and started looking for job openings in other states. I didn't know what I was searching for, but I was determined to find it. A week later, I received a promising offer from a company in Seattle, a place I'd always wanted to visit, but never had the chance. I took the job. I packed up my things, said my goodbyes to Mark and a few close friends, and drove out of town without looking back. It was a bittersweet moment, but I knew this was my opportunity to rebuild. I wasn't sure what lay ahead, but for the first time in a long while, I felt hopeful. Maybe, just maybe, I could find happiness again. Moving to Seattle felt like stepping into another world. The cool, misty mornings, the vibrant downtown, and the fresh start were exactly what I needed. I rented a small apartment on the outskirts of the city and threw myself into my new job. The work was challenging, but I welcomed it. It kept me focused and gave me a reason to get up every day. But adjusting wasn't easy. There were nights when I'd find myself staring out at the city lights, thinking about everything I left behind. It's strange how, even after so much pain, you still miss the familiar. I'd catch myself reaching for my phone, wanting to call Jessica out of habit, only to stop and remember why I couldn't. One evening, after a particularly tough day at work, I decided to explore the neighborhood. There was a cozy little coffee shop on the corner that I'd passed by a few times, but never entered. I walked in, ordered a black coffee, and found a seat by the window. It was quiet, almost empty, except for a few people scattered around with their laptops and books. As I sat there, sipping my coffee, I noticed a woman at the next table glancing over. She looked to be around my age, with dark hair and kind eyes. When she caught me looking, she smiled softly. "First time here?" she asked, gesturing to my untouched pastry. Yeah, just moved to the area, I replied. We started talking, just small talk at first, about the weather, the city, and how I was adjusting. Her name was Emily, and she'd been living in Seattle for over 10 years. Before I knew it, we'd been chatting for over an hour. It felt good to talk to someone new, to have a conversation that wasn't weighed down by the past. "Welcome to Seattle, Jack," she said with a smile as she got up to leave. "Maybe I'll see you around here again?" "Maybe you will," I replied, feeling a flicker of something I hadn't felt in a long time, genuine interest. As I walked back to my apartment that evening, I realized that, despite everything, life was still full of possibilities. Meeting Emily was just a small moment, but it reminded me that there was more to life than betrayal and heartbreak. There were new people to meet, new places to explore, and maybe one day, even new connections to be made. For the first time since leaving everything behind, I felt like I was beginning to see a way forward. I kept going back to the coffee shop, hoping to see Emily again. One evening, just as I was about to leave, I spotted her by the window. She looked up, smiled, and waved me over. "Back again," she teased. "Yeah," I replied, smiling back. "I guess I like the coffee here." We talked for hours, sharing bits about our lives. I told her about my move, keeping the details vague. Emily, it turned out, was a graphic designer who loved hiking and photography. "You seem real," she said suddenly. "Like you're not hiding anything." I laughed softly. "Maybe I'm just tired of pretending." She nodded. "Maybe that's a good thing." For the first time in a long while, I left the cafe feeling a little lighter. I wasn't sure where things would go, but I realized I hadn't thought about Jessica or Ryan once during our conversation. It felt like a small step forward, one I was finally ready to take. Over the next few weeks, Emily and I settled into a comfortable rhythm. We'd meet for coffee a few evenings a week, chatting about everything from movies to Seattle's unpredictable weather. She was easy to talk to, and slowly I found myself letting my guard down. One rainy evening, after a long day at work, I decided to finally tell her a bit more. "There's something I haven't shared," I began cautiously. "The real reason I moved here." Emily looked at me, concern in her eyes, but no judgment. "You don't have to say anything if you're not ready." "I want to," I said, taking a deep breath. I told her about Jessica and Ryan, leaving out the rawest details, but explaining the betrayal and why I had to leave. Emily listened quietly, her expression softening as I spoke. "I'm so sorry, Jack," she said gently. "That must have been so painful." "It was," I admitted. "But moving here, meeting you, it's helped. More than I expected." She reached out and squeezed my hand. "I'm glad you told me, and I'm glad you're here, too." For the first time, I felt a sense of closure. Sharing my story didn't erase the pain, but it felt like opening a door to something new, a life that wasn't defined by my past anymore. After that night, something shifted between Emily and me. I felt more at ease around her, and our conversations grew deeper. I no longer felt the need to hold back or pretend that I was okay when I wasn't. I could just be me, someone who was still healing but finally starting to hope again. One Saturday, Emily suggested we go on a hike together. "There's a beautiful trail up by the Cascade Mountains," she said. "It's my favorite place to clear my head." I hesitated for a moment, thinking back to how much I used to love hiking before everything fell apart. "I'd like that," I replied, surprising even myself. The hike was peaceful, the crisp mountain air refreshing. As we walked, we didn't talk much, just enjoyed the silence and each other's company. It felt good to be out in nature again, to move forward step by step, not just on the trail, but in my life. At the summit, we stood side by side, looking out over the sprawling landscape below. "I think you're going to be okay, Jack," Emily said softly, turning to me. I looked at her, feeling a warmth I hadn't felt in a long time. "Yeah," I said quietly. "I think I am." As the weeks turned into months, Emily became a constant presence in my life, a reminder that I could still find joy and connection, even after everything I'd been through. Our friendship slowly blossomed, into something more. It wasn't rushed or forced. It felt natural, like two people gradually finding their way to each other. One evening, we were sitting on my small balcony, watching the sun set over the Seattle skyline. Emily leaned closer, her shoulder brushing against mine. "You've come a long way, Jack," she murmured, a soft smile on her lips. "I couldn't have done it without you," I admitted. "I thought I'd never be able to trust anyone again." She turned to look at me, her gaze steady and filled with warmth. "Trust takes time, but I'm willing to wait however long it takes." In that moment, I realized how far I'd come, from a man shattered by betrayal to someone ready to take a chance on love again. I didn't know what the future held for us, but I wasn't afraid anymore. I reached out and took her hand. "I'm ready to try," I said softly, "with you." And for the first time in a long while, I felt something I hadn't felt in ages: peace. The past would always be a part of me, but it no longer defined me. With Emily by my side, I was finally ready to embrace whatever came next.